Alright, what's up guys? So, a few days ago, I played Doom: The Dark Ages during the early access period, and while I would say I enjoyed the game to a certain degree, the game has a lot of glaring issues that make it inferior to 2016 and Eternal. Now, before I talk about the gameplay of Doom: The Dark Ages, I will talk about a few other minor aspects of the game, and to start off, I will be talking about the graphics. Now, the graphics are, of course, just like how you would see in every other modern game, which is, of course, fine. It is not a huge step up from Eternal, but of course, graphics have not gotten really that much better since somewhere into the PS4 generation. So it's not really anything to be expected that we would get a big graphical leap, and me personally, I don't really care about graphics as much as I care about the art style of a video game, which Doom: The Dark Ages, I would say, fits into what it's trying to go for pretty well. Now, for the story, I would say that the story of Doom: The Dark Ages is not really a good one at all. Now, I don't personally care about this because the only story I need in Doom is basically just shoot demons. Of course, they did try to put more focus on the story in this game. Now, it's not too egregious in that aspect, but of course, the story that they deliver is not really that great, which, as I said, I personally think is fine. But I don't really think they needed to expand on it in the first place. And then there's the music, which I cannot tell you if the music is really quality or not. Maybe some metal fans could inform me. But personally, I didn't really care for the music. It was just kind of there. It was more noise, and I didn't really care for the music in 2016 or Eternal either, so it's not really a big deal for me. But as I said in my Expedition 33 review, I personally prefer classical and orchestral music, so I didn't really care for the music in this game. But, you know, as I said, for me, I'm aware of what the music is in Doom, so it wasn't really too big of a deal for me. Anyway, that's pretty much all of the minor categories out of the way. Now, I will move on to a bigger aspect of the game, which of course is the wokeness. Now, of course, Doom: The Dark Ages, being a modern video game, does have wokeness in it. It is pretty much unavoidable in most Western modern video games now. Now, while the wokeness is not too egregious in Doom: The Dark Ages, and you still can enjoy the game despite the fact that it's in it, it still needs to be noticed and pointed out because there are certain things in Doom: The Dark Ages that are obviously meant to be subversive. The most obvious woke element in this game is Commander Thera, and Commander Thera, you may notice, has very different facial proportions from your average woman, and also, interestingly, is voiced by Deborah Wilson. Now, if you don't know who Deborah Wilson is, she is basically in a lot of modern video games as the token black woman. Now, in this game, for some reason, she voices a white woman, which I found interesting, because a lot of leftists like to use the argument that a voice actor has to be accurate to their character in order to voice them, but I guess no one will complain about this. But ever since the Wolfenstein 2017 game, Deborah Wilson has been in a lot of video games, and you can tell why she's in there, and she's pretty much a woke filter for a lot of modern video games. Anyway, to go back to Commander Thera, at some points in the story she kinda seemed like a girl boss character to me, and that's because she essentially has godlike powers, and there was one point at the end of the story where she opens a gateway almost similar to Virgil, so I guess that's the women are the key to everything trope. And then also at one point, not too long after that, she kills a bunch of demons with her badass godlike powers, dude. So, you know, that kind of seemed like it was trying to make you feel like she was a complete badass. And I suppose the last woke thing I should mention in Doom: The Dark Ages is that there seems to be quite a bit of diverse NPCs in some areas of the game, which this seems to be a common trend with modern games, as we saw in Expedition 33, which a lot of people tried to deny that there was DEI in that game, which there was DEI, but of course, don't believe your lying eyes. But yes, I did notice this at a certain point, and I did find it somewhat funny. And what I also found funny was that quite a bit of the NPCs had the same character model, so that did feel somewhat cheap. And yeah, I know that's a major nitpick to mention that a lot of the NPCs looked the same, but you know, still, it is something that was in the game, and so I will mention it. And now we get to the most important part of a video game, which is, of course, the gameplay. Now, I did quite enjoy the gameplay of 2016 and Eternal, and I would say that to a certain degree, as I said, I did enjoy the gameplay of Doom the Dark Ages, but I think in a lot of aspects, it is a step down, and I think there's some things that would have been better unchanged, and some new things they added that I don't really think are a great addition to the combat. I should also mention that I did play on journalist difficulty, and yeah, I know, complete casual, but the reason why I'm mentioning this is because who knows if my criticisms will be even worse for higher difficulties, considering I did play on the easiest difficulty. So if you're playing on normal or even hard, things could be considerably worse for you, especially in the aspect of parrying, which I will get into. Now, I'm just gonna say straight up that this game did not need parrying, and I'm extremely sick and tired of Souls-light elements being forced into every modern video game. And yes, I said Souls-light, not Souls-like, for the people who want to nitpick and say that I'm saying that Doom is like Souls, when I'm not. I'm just saying it has Souls elements, or I guess to be more accurate, you could say Sekiro elements. And I know Expedition 33, which released not that long ago, also has parrying in it, but what separates it from Doom the Dark Ages is it actually does work in Expedition 33. Of course, I still do have criticisms about it, but I would say overall it flows pretty well with the combat. The problem with a first-person shooter like Doom is it just does not need parrying, because you're just going to be shooting a gun most of the time. And of course, what will you be using to parry? Well, you'll be using the shield, and I do think the shield can be fun to use when you're attacking enemies, but when you have to parry, it kind of makes things a little bit obnoxious, because you have to focus on parrying rather than shooting the enemies, and that can kind of break up the flow of combat a bit. To pivot to another aspect of the gameplay, I will be talking about the glory kills, or I suppose you could say the lack thereof. Now, unfortunately, in Doom the Dark Ages, there are no traditional glory kills like there are in 2016 and Eternal. Rather, you bash enemies with either your fist, a flail, or a mace. And I personally don't think this is as interesting as the old glory kills. Now, I understand to a certain extent why they did this, because of course it does keep things more active and doesn't lock you into an animation, but personally I did like the small dopamine hit you got from the old glory kills in the older games, because you got these super gory animations where you kill the demons, while now it's pretty much just hitting them with something and that's it. Now, if you're lucky, and this is pretty rare to do, you can actually trigger a glory kill animation on the demons. Now, personally, I only experienced this one time in the game where I used the shield saw to saw a demon's head off, and of course, while this was cool, it seems more to be a Easter egg rather than an actual mechanic in the game, and I did find it disappointing. So sometimes you can trigger a glory kill in the game, but of course it is quite rare. And speaking of glory kills, which were quite gory, there seems to be a severe lack of gore in this game, and it has definitely been lessened compared to 2016 and Eternal, as it doesn't seem there's really a lot of blood that comes out of enemies now. Now, weirdly enough, you do see a good amount of gore in the cutscenes, especially when Doom Guy kills a lot of the demons, but it doesn't really seem that you see it in gameplay, and I did did find it disappointing, because one of the things that was cool about Doom is it was quite a gory franchise, but it does not seem to be the case in this game. And to a certain degree, I do think this is the Microsoft effect, as of course Microsoft does seem to resent the fact these days that they were the edgy dude bro console back in the day, and a lot of this can trace back to someone like Phil Spencer, because after all, that was the guy that made the no swearing group on Xbox, and with that information, you can probably guess why things are noticeably less edgy now. Luckily, despite this, the guns do still feel pretty good to use, as this is id Software, and they are very good at making first-person shooters, as the guns do feel pretty useful in just about any situation, and this is compared to Doom Eternal, where you had to use certain weapons in certain situations, and luckily in this game, you can pretty much use any weapon you want, which just kinda helps with a more power fantasy feel. Now, of course, there are some negatives in the combat, and that is mostly about the dragon and mech sections of the game, and while these aren't necessarily bad sections, I do think they have issues, as they are mostly on rails, and I would say especially the dragon segments of the game has issues, as this does implement a lot more parrying, just like how it's in other parts of the game, so I do think this is a problem personally, and I think they could have handled these sections a lot better. There is, of course, another big negative with Doom the Dark Ages, and that is the fact that there are a lot of missions in the game where you have to essentially complete 3 objectives of the same thing, and this can get very repetitive very quickly. And it does kind of lean into the repetitive nature of a lot of the game, as in general the game does have way too much padding, and compared to games like 2016 and Eternal, it is pretty bad in that regard. And of course there is padding right at the end of the game, because you think you beat the final boss, but then it turns out that you didn't, and you have to fight him again. And this is a pretty good example of padding, because honestly, there were a lot of missions in Doom the Dark Ages that just didn't need to be in there. And unfortunately, this is kind of the effect of people thinking that the longer a game is, the more worth your while it is. So unfortunately, the game is padded to hell. Now, there is another gameplay issue in the game, and that is at certain points in the game, you have to fight certain boss enemies, and these enemies give you health upgrades, but the problem here is that these enemies are invulnerable until you kill a bunch of trash demons, essentially. So that can make things very repetitive and very annoying, because you have to go around killing a bunch of demons while this boss demon damages you constantly, just so that way you can damage that demon and get its upgrade so you can progress. Anyway, I think I've covered just about everything in Doom the Dark Ages, so what do I think overall about the game? Now, I think the game is probably between okay and good, which means it is a 6.5 out of 10 game. Now, of course, there may be some people that say a 6.5 is a horrible rating and the game is mediocre. And no, I am not saying the game is mediocre. If that was the case, I would have given the game a 4, but a 6.5 essentially means it's worth playing, it's just probably not worth playing yet until you can afford it at a cheap cost. So yeah, overall, that's really what I think about the game. So I don't know, do everything that gives me engagement, essentially.